Hello and welcome to B Shifter. John Vance here. Josh Blum and I today will be speaking with Adam Barowy. Adam is a research engineer for UL's Fire Safety Research Institute, and today we are going to be talking about the science of fire and explosion hazards from lithium-ion batteries. Adam's going to talk about a number of resources that are available for you to train on and pass on to the folks on your department. We will include all of that information in the show notes. So without further ado, let's talk to Adam Barowy about lithium-ion batteries and fires. All right, Adam Barowy, thanks for being with us today and discussing this issue that we're seeing more and more with lithium-ion batteries and the fire hazard they pose. So give us a little bit of background on where we are now as compared to, our world before lithium-ion batteries and this progression that we've seen with these fires that are being caused and other hazardous conditions being caused by the batteries. Sure.
Yeah, it's timely that you asked that question because I was actually just at the Washington D.C. car show yesterday. I was legitimately working, I swear, and what I was doing there was trying to figure out how many EVs are out, how they're being built, and all that. What I didn't anticipate was at this car show seeing a battery-powered bus, battery-powered wheelchair, battery-powered concept cars. There was a hovercraft there that was battery-powered, motorcycles. I mean, it was really a showcase of the technology of batteries that was not advertised. This was just supposed to be a car show, but it really, under one roof, showed us how far batteries have gone. And, as compared to how it was before we started seeing so much batteries in everything, the closest thing I would equate it to was the push of putting polyurethane foam in everything. Polyurethane foam changed the way home fires burn. It changed the timeline for people to get out, changed the timeline for the fire service to respond. And it, as we know, it changed fire dynamics and how fires respond to ventilation. So I see it as kind of like the second coming of polyurethane foam in terms of creating a hazard, because where you used to have things with cords, now, you've got lithium-ion batteries in your drills at home. They're in your power banks. And so I don't necessarily see this as some like overnight change in the nightmare. It's just something to be aware of, that now there's a new hazard and it grows with scale. So, a portable power tool is going to have some amount of risk to it, but that risk is going to potentially get bigger as you go towards bigger, do-it-yourself power walls in someone's garage. It's essentially made out of the same batteries that you have in a power tool. So that's how I see this shift. And basically, if something consumes power now, there's going to be a lot of interest in people putting in lithium-ion batteries in it. So I don't want to get too far ahead of what you guys want to talk about, but I do see this as, let's not just look at EVs. Let's not just look at energy storage, but let's understand the batteries themselves so you're equipped to respond to them wherever you find them.
So you guys have done some work here in the last year. I know you were at FDNY and they did a symposium there on some of the fires that they'd had and the batteries, and 300 and some people there. And one of our things is just trying to get this out there and connecting the people of some of the things you mentioned, that it's not like, oh my God, like world's coming to an end, but it's something that we have to understand, and that it's going to affect fire dynamics. And what does that really look like? And I guess as more time goes by and you guys do more and more research, how's that impacting like life safety profile? And I think it brings a whole new level to, the whole close before you doze thing of being behind the door. But, when you watch some of the videos of the e-bike that's on the program that you guys just released on January 19th, I want to make sure everybody's aware of that, because I think it's a phenomenal thing that you guys pushed out, which is what really triggered us to connect with you about right. What you guys are doing with that. But, it appears that 10 by 12 room, or however big it is, in seconds, goes from nothing to it's full and like a hostile fire environment. So, that's going to impact, a whole lot of our decision making, which comes back to the program that we do with, the strategic decision making model. And I think the lithium ion battery piece is a critical factor that, everybody on the fire ground is going to have to start thinking about when you pull up, like what's going on there. And you mentioned a cell phone or a battery or a computer or whatever. And it just keeps triggering in my mind about when they open that overhead compartment on that airplane and that computer's off. It's like, wow, that's something. And in December, we had Shane Ray here from the National Fire Sprinkler Association. He said, I wonder how long it'll be before somebody has some kind of contraption to put on an airplane that you could put a phone, computer, one of these small devices in, because you have to be able to contain it somehow. And it's like, well, it's just a different thing, right? So we just have to think about it different. And one of our visions in Blue Card and B Shifter is we want to be on the forefront of things, right? We want to give people the tools, and we don't want somebody to say, man, I wish I knew that. If somebody knows it, we want everybody to know it. So I think that's just a piece of it. And you talked about the whole scale thing. Like, you think about that e-bike and that's in the program that you guys put together of that single room. But then I think about a Tesla car sitting in a, 2-car garage in a 5,000 square foot house. And what does that look like? And what is that going to do? And not to mention just the runaway part of it, but some of that violent explosion stuff that I see in some of the videos and stuff. And it's like, what does that do? And that's going to create a whole nother thing when it blows the garage door out or blows a window out, or, what does that do to the entire fire environment? So I think there's a lot of stuff that we can talk about. And again, not to get ahead of where we want to go with this, but I just wanted to, so that I think we're all on the same page of like, what are we really doing with this and what does it look like? And, kind of where's it going? So,
well, I think, I understand how it's so hard to wrap it all up in the one quick comment or one quick question. That's why just before that symposium in New York City, I talked to Dan Machkowski in the office here, and he kind of asked me to provide an overview on sort of the science of what's going on with batteries. That really set the stage, I think, for the approach that we want to take from here on out. That course that you mentioned we released is one of the ways that we're trying to address all the battery problems. So it doesn't tell you how to put out an EV fire. It's not going to tell you how to approach an energy storage system that's had thermal runaway. But the idea is, if you're going to be potentially, tasked with opening that overhead compartment in the plane, there's some gases inside there. Just knowing what it means for that to be there, so you can start making decisions based on what you know about the hazards. To give you maybe a different example, if your cell phone started smoking on your desktop, you might throw it in your trash can and fill it full of water. That's easy, but you can't do that to an EV, and you can't do that to the system that they had in Surprise, Arizona that exploded in 2019. A lot of it is what's around the battery affects what tactic you can employ. We don't know immediately what those tactics are. So we're going to start taking a look this year at what we can do with EV, what approaches might you take with the tools you have, and then start answering those questions specifically about EV. But there's not like a silver bullet for batteries. It's going to depend on all the specifics of however it's involved in the incident.
Well, let's start with the smaller items first, where we're seeing the runaway happen because of either improper charging or people have made modifications to some of these scooters because they want to soup them up. And we're seeing those in multifamily dwellings, 20 floors up in urban areas. Yep. What is causing that? Let's dig into a little bit of what's causing that. And then maybe if we can get into a little bit of how do we address those types of issues?
Sure. So, I mean, what's causing that? Like, why are you seeing it in e-mobility and you're not seeing it in EV, for example? And if you look at how they've developed both products, EV, they're doing crash testing, and there's expectations for the safety performance of an electric vehicle. So there's engineers and scientists working to make those safer and going through all these different failure scenarios. The battery packs, especially like the ones that we bought for when we ran some demonstrations this fall that you referred to, those are essentially just lithium-ion batteries jammed as tight as you can get them into a battery pack. There's little to no safety designed to those at all. So if one cell in that battery pack goes in thermal runaway, that could very likely, and as we showed you, it did run through the whole battery pack, and it does it very quickly. There are safer versions. So there are big companies, and I won't point me out to look like I'm playing favorites, but you could go with a big reputable brand that's done voluntary safety testing, but that makes it more expensive. And so it comes down, frankly, to socioeconomics as well. There are people in New York City using these vehicles to do their day jobs. They're making an income off it. Now that they're dependent on it, they can't very well just say, well, I'm going to quit using this dangerous one because I can't afford the expensive one. So it comes down to making ends meet. So that's why they're still buying them. They're still modifying them so they can go faster, so they can charge them faster. And oftentimes, you're seeing whole rooms that people are, doing this battery swapping where they're taking a dead one and charging a fee and giving a fresh one, to whoever's using them. And so all of those contribute to, okay, well, they were unsafe to begin with. Now you're modifying and pushing them harder, and you're accumulating these devices all under, in one room or under one roof. So the more of them you have, the more likely you are to have some kind of incident. And start lumping all those things together, and it's going to increase the severity, or I should say the likelihood that you're going to have an incident. And then of course the severity is high rise is going to be a lot worse condition than say out in the middle of the street. So what can we do about it? I think I'll let you come back to that because I think you had a direction you wanted to go.
I think there's two ways that we might be able to think about this. Number one is prevention. What do we work on with prevention? How can we educate the public on that when we're doing our public education about the modification, storage, where you charge, how you charge? So let's start there, and then we'll get into mitigation.
So there is definitely a public education piece. As you know, that's kind of one part of the pie. I like seeing all the parts of the pie. You could have detection, fire detection, alarm. That's going to give people time to get out. I know that's a different question altogether, but I think there's, other than news headlines coming out and saying that there's a lot of fires in New York City, the mentality we're always fighting is, well, that's not going to happen to me. I think we need to break through that a little bit better by showing, some of the demonstrations we've done to look up close and say, look, you might not think this is going to happen to you, but if you do these things, your living room may go from fine to potentially life-threatening conditions inside 30 seconds. That's a faster development of hazardous conditions than just about anything else that can go in your home. And push that out to the public. That's absolutely going to help. And then I think some other efforts on the building side, which I've heard proposed, I haven't seen yet. But for example, a journalist asked me the other day about this concept an architect came up with, which is essentially almost like an area of refuge, but the e-bikes go in that for charging. It's kind of like a reverse area of refuge. And the idea is that in some public housing, some new public housing, they would have a concrete block room, high fire resistance, and high flow sprinklers to try to control the hazard, which I do think is a step in the right direction. But until we really know by test that sprinklers are going to control the hazard, and binning them all up in one room doesn't just put all the fuel in one spot. And as we know with some of the gas that comes out, potentially create an explosion hazard. I think that explosion hazard's probably not going to be out of control in a situation like that. But again, we don't have that data, so we need to take a look.
So when you're looking at, between the mobility scooter type thing, we mentioned power tools. Right now I have a lawnmower and a snowblower that are both powered by lithium-ion batteries. Where are we seeing the threat? What do we have to look out for in our own homes right now, or if we're out doing inspections or we're advising the public? What do we tell them about this?
The biggest threat, frankly, right now is sort of with I don't know whether to call them generic or sort of off-brand e-mobility devices, but that's where we're seeing the highest incidence of thermal runaways or battery fires. And that's just what I'm telling you from impressions that we're getting from people contacting us and from reading the news. One of the challenges, as I'm sure you're already aware, NFIRS doesn't have, a box where you can say, well, this was a power tool pack or an e-mobility device or a an electric vehicle. There's just no way to capture that. So with the rate of incidents, we know of I think some incidents where it's being blamed on batteries, and maybe the battery got burned up in the normal fire, or where the batteries are just being missed. I know when we talked to FDNY a few months back, once they started recognizing that batteries could be the cause of the fire, their number of incidents jumped way up because they started finding batteries burned up in those fires. So, that's been a big part of the challenge.
And then if we do have an incident where the battery is involved, how do we get toward mitigation, not only extinguishing that, but is there anything we should be doing to report it so that information is collected by you guys? Because I know that, FSRI is going to want to know about these instances if we're not getting the information through NFIRS.
We don't collect that data. At least we're not talking about doing that right now. I do have a colleague who works back in UL Chicago, and she's created a database. Her name is Veronica Kimmerly. She's creating a database of all the different battery failure incidents she can find globally. And she's coming up with some fascinating numbers. But for consumer products, I know that you can submit data to the Consumer Product Safety Commission, and CPSC's got some pressure, and I know that they're taking a harder look at e-mobility devices, but I can't speak on their behalf. I would just, if you suspect it's got a battery incident, related to it, submit it to them.
And then extinguishment and dealing with the hazard once it's ran away and ignited.
Well, if it's for small devices, I think there's no one better right now than FDNY to look to for some guidance on how to deal with those. So I'll refer you over to them. I'm not sure if they published their SOP for lithium-ion battery incidents, but they've got their own internal guidance now on what to do with suspect products. And essentially, I think they've got, I don't want to speak too carefully about it because I haven't memorized it, but anything that's been heat impacted at this point. So if it's gone in a thermal runaway, or whether or not it has, if it looks suspect, they're breaking it down and packaging it inside what they call overpack. So there's like a non-combustible material they put inside a drum, and they layer it all up. So basically, if it does go into thermal runaway, it's contained. Operationally, they have more specific guidance, because I know that they're concerned with like a reignition. You wouldn't want to take it down a stairwell, for example, or down an elevator. There has been some incidents globally where that's occurred, and that's obviously a pretty big concern. But I'll point you to their SOP. I can email it to you and hopefully get it maybe linked to your show.
Yeah, we'll include that SOP in the show notes and let everybody know what that is.
So we've seen in recent month, 2 months, some apparatus fires, and they're blaming them on charging banks in the apparatus. So that's off. That's just a whole other thing, right? So it's really convenient to have, whatever tool being battery powered, and you don't have to connect it to a pump and hydraulic and all of that. But have you guys looked into any of those at all? Was the battery damaged maybe, and then, or was it? Has anybody looked into that? Do you know, or have you guys done anything with that?
I haven't heard whether anyone looked into that, but I mean that's where I sort of see this as being, that's one of the many challenges we're going to have to deal with. Now, I will say that one of the challenges is going to be, you're going to want to leave them on charge all the time. So you might build that charging system into your truck, so it's beautiful, it's ready to go when it comes time to pull that tool off. But one of the things we did back in the lab in Chicago was we put everything kind of separated from all the rest of our equipment and put it on a timed charging circuit. So it would fill all the way up, when we depleted it, and then it would just get a boost charge every once in a while. not something I'm recommending as the solution, but in our own backyard, that's how we managed to control the risk. We said, let's make sure it only charges when we know there's going to be people right here next to it, and it's just charging for a short time every day. And I don't know that you can apply that to an apparatus, but that's how we dealt with our similar problem.
Yeah, and then the same thing, I guess, on the tools, as we've seen in the last few months, we've seen where some extrication equipment, I guess, where the battery got punctured in some way, shape, or form. And it was an interesting thing that once that battery went into runaway, basically, and it started off gassing and caught fire, the tool quits working. Well, it's just another thing in our industry, for us to talk about and share with everybody on here is like, if you got some kind of battery powered RAM in a door and it gets punctured and that thing starts to run away and now the tool's not going to work, well, you still got a victim inside there. So it's a whole nother consideration of how you're going to deal with that and what does it look like. So I think it's something that we have to understand the risk associated with the tools that we're using and where we're using them. And if that happens, like, yeah, it's a smaller battery, but it's still going to create a pretty significant event at a car. So it's at a car with a victim that's got, flammable materials inside of it. So I think it's a whole other piece that our industry is going to have to think about of how do we can't plan for every little thing, but it's happened several times now. We've seen it. So it's like, it's bound to happen because it's not a sterile environment. And it's like, how could we control that, extinguish that? Like, what's the best thing to do with it? And I don't know if there's a for sure answer yet, but.
Yeah, I can say I haven't looked into that specific issue, but it's like any other tool. What if you're up on the roof and your saw dies and it will not start again? Then what do? There's always going to be some scenarios to plan for. And to get back to your earlier question, yeah, actually, I was just struggling to recall it for a second, but with smaller devices, I think some of the issues to be very concerned about, more specific to them, is the battery packs in something like a consumer product aren't necessarily built to like really robustly hold those cells in. So if you watch some hoverboard videos, you might see cells getting thrown out. They're a secondary ignition source, but if some cells get thrown out, but they haven't gone into thermal runaway yet, and now you start, say, pulling ceilings down, they're going to get buried. And if they are heat impacted in a way where they're susceptible to go to thermal runaway later, of course, that's a significant concern about rekindle. But what's worse now is that you may not be there when the rekindle occurs if you don't find all these batteries. And now you pulled the ceiling down. So now your structure is exposed. So that secondary fire could potentially be a bigger hazard than the first. And, it's frankly, it's an unenviable task to try to go find all these things. I know, again, coming back to that event we had with FDNY in September, they were showing, the labor involved, where they got this battery pack and they go looking for the 3 missing cells in the pile of junk that's left behind from overhauling. And there's no good answer for that. But I think that just knowing that you got to account for everything is going to be important in preventing the next, rekindle.
So graduating from some of those smaller batteries, then how much are we seeing this in large electric vehicles or power banks? We're seeing RVs now where they eliminate the generator and it's just all lithium ion battery banks and, solar charging systems. Are we seeing anything with those? And do we have those same concerns? Because that's going to be a much bigger fire problem than just a small battery.
Well, again, everything's going to be underreported because, if a homeowner has one of these little, I think sometimes they call them solar generators, whatever, if that bursts into flames at your campsite and you're lucky enough that none of your stuff gets destroyed, you're going to be bummed out and probably throw it in the trash and maybe not even ever report that. So there's not a good system for us to know how much it's happening. Now, I also haven't heard of it too much. There was a CPSC recall on a similar type, sort of portable power bank for the scale you'd use to power your camper for a little while. So there's not too many of those. EV, we know a lot better about. Again, it's still not super robust, but the nice part is that just about every time a Tesla catches on fire, it's sensational right now. So you hear about it in the news. That being said, there's a group out of Australia. I believe they're called EV Fire Safe. And it's gonna show that I'm not doing my homework, but I think they put out their report last week, and they basically have their staff digging as hard as they can to figure out how many EV fires that there have been worldwide. I want to say right now, they set a number less than 500, just from memory. Again, it's not like a rash of EV fires. There's now millions on the road. And so that failure rate's pretty low. But, I think, as you may have seen in some of our research that we started doing some preliminary releases on, once you start getting into battery packs sort of at this, maybe a little above the scale of this portable power bank and getting towards EV, now we're starting to think, well, is that battery pack big enough to start changing fire dynamics for residential structure? So if you've got an EV on fire inside a garage in a closed door, and that fire goes vent limited, and you've got batteries going in thermal runaway, putting flammable gas in, and this fire doesn't have enough oxygen to burn, are we going to see a change in the way that fire behaves when first responders show up and start making entry and doing what they anticipate for a normal structure fire? And so some of our preliminary work shows that, things can be different. And so we want to understand, well, what can you tell if there's batteries involved in that type of fire? And if they are involved, what do you need to know so you can make the right tactical decisions and even be safe during your size up?
As we're getting more and more electric and we're hearing about the possibility of airplanes and other vehicles that are powered this way. What do you know of anything being done other than they are higher end? They're going to get tested to try to make those systems safe as we expand it in transportation. Well,
I'm going to loop back on my earlier answer a little bit. I mean, the auto industry has all of their crash tests. I've run a couple of it's been about 5 or 6 years, but I ran a couple of the auto industry fire tests, and frankly, they were pretty rigorous. I mean, we were putting a vehicle battery pack above a flammable liquids fire. It's the rules. It's got to be basically bigger than the battery pack on all sides by 1 to 2 feet. You end up with a flame that's about 15 to 20 feet tall. So it is a mean, big exposure. It's got to sit there for a couple minutes, and then you pull it out, and basically has to not go into thermal runaway. So they're really abusing those battery packs. But if you take that out and say, well, that's great, it passed all the safety standards, but it goes down the road, it hits a raised manhole cover, and then it goes to a fly-by-night mechanic, and sits in their shop, and they're going to do whatever to it. They've never seen it before, but they say, I can fix that. That's already happened. There's been an incident with that. It didn't turn out too bad, but I mean, we can say, great, all your safety standards. Now, the worst scenario happens. What happens with the development of those conditions? That's sort of where our research is coming in.
And thermal runaway is different because I've had some hybrid vehicles that we've responded on that the vehicle catches on fire because the house is on fire. And then once the lithium ion battery pack or batteries get involved, the fire grows and it's difficult to extinguish. So those are two different things that we're talking about here, right?
Yep. Yeah.
The auto communication of being close to a combustible and then the battery catching on fire versus thermal runaway. So maybe you could help us, dig down into that a little bit more and explain that.
Yeah. Sure. Well, actually, the timing on that question is pretty good too, because there was a paper that came out of a lab in Korea, and so what they did, it's Korean cars, so they're a bit smaller. But if you look at what a car is an electric vehicle, you've got basically a cabin full of flammable interior finish, and then you got a battery pack on the bottom where your fuel tank would go. And so they separated it out in a couple tests where they burned just the battery and they burned just the cabin. They also burned a couple internal combustion engine cars. What they found was basically there wasn't much difference in the size of the fire, but the cars with the battery packs, those fires grew a little faster. So once the thermal runaway got going in the battery, it lit up the inside of the car and, sort of pushed it faster than just igniting the surface material just by itself. So they could potentially burn a little bit faster, but essentially they were saying the fire size is going to be about the same. Now, as I think you just alluded to, one of the big differences is going to be you could get that cabin fire out, likely very successfully, just like you would with, the cars we've had for decades. But getting water into that battery pack or to that battery pack is going to be a significant challenge because those manufacturers, of course, don't want water inside that battery pack as it goes down the road. So, getting the water where it matters is going to be a real challenge. And I'm sure you're seeing some creative approaches. I love the ingenuity of the fire service and how we got a problem. Let's go out in the parking lot and figure it out right now. But I think that even that level of ingenuity is going to be really challenged by the construction of the cars.
When we're seeing 25,000 gallons of water being put on a Tesla that's on fire, is it because then the water isn't getting to where it needs to be, or is it because of the stored energy?
It's very likely because the water's not getting where it needs to be. Those battery pack enclosures tend to be very, very robust steel. And so from some commercial testing experience on like the stationary energy storage systems, the big containerized ones, I can tell you that some manufacturers have started getting wise to their early test results from 5-6 years ago. And now they're incorporating technologies that are getting extinguishing agents in where the batteries are. And that's been demonstrated to be effective. So if you can get a purchase on those batteries, and I think that's why you're seeing those, sort of piercing nozzle type approaches, you can get the water in, you can start taking the heat away. But 30,000 gallons of water is likely being thrown at the battery. Like if Tesla said at the FDNY symposium that they've got, banks or modules of batteries inside that battery pack. And so when one goes up, if you were to try to throw water at that and pull as much heat as you can out and sort of delay it and slow it down, well, it's going to take time to get to the next one. Then it's going to go up again. So if you keep responding and throwing water at this thing every time it goes up, you're going to end up at 30,000 gallons of water. So I don't want to sound like I'm saying I have the answer right now, but we do want to, in our research this year, take a look at, well, if you throw all that water at it, what's the maximum possible benefit you can hope to achieve? I mean, can you do it so much that you stop the battery from going into thermal runaway? And maybe now you've got this stranded energy situation to deal with. Or, there's a growing, a suggestion that I'm seeing on some fire service channels that says, well, let it burn. But of course, let it burn is not going to work everywhere. It won't work inside a tunnel. It's not going to work inside a parking garage. So, what are the limitations of let it burn? And what's in the middle of the road? If you throw water at the cabin fire and let the battery burn out, what do we get out of that scenario? The challenge is either whoever has done any testing can't release that data because it's proprietary to a manufacturer, or the test data is just not available. So that's what we want to do, is start saying, look, we've done this, we've made the measurements, and here is our data. And here are some conclusions. We can say this is based on a test. We've seen it, we've done it live, and let's get you some decision aids based on that data.
So what tactical considerations should we have as incident commanders, firefighters? We're pulling up, we suspect this. What should be going through our heads when we think that the lithium-ion battery might be involved?
You mean specific to electric vehicles, or just kind of anything?
Just kind of anything, And what I'm talking about is in the residential setting when we possibly have this inside a single-family residence or an apartment building, those kind of things first, and then vehicles that are outside pose a different kind of risk and a less
Sure.
risk. So,
well, good. So, and again, I'm going to point back to our course a little bit, because we try to point at some of the things that are going to be common across all different types of batteries. So if I just shoot from the hip, the first thing I'd be considering is if there are batteries involved, that gas is potentially flammable. So if you can see like the conditions at Surprise, Arizona, if you can see this kind of neutral, hanging white cloud, that is potentially a flammable off gas from batteries. So, you sort of need to treat that almost like a gas leak. So I'd assume it's ignitable. I'd assume that there could be more coming, because if you watch any different number of lithium-ion battery products go through thermal runaway, as they go from cell to cell, it can take a little time. So if something has already gone to thermal runaway, there could be some more. It may not be done yet. So it could be this ongoing hazard. In some instances, as the batteries get bigger, there's elements inside that contain fluoride. So if you're very close to the source of that smoke, hydrogen fluoride gas could be an obvious respiratory hazard. So everything that you use already for PPE with regards to smoke exposure, that's going to be your recommendation. For residential, if there's active fire and the battery's involved, that's what we're in the middle of figuring out right now. We did see an increase in flammability in the smoke. So when we made changes in ventilation, in one case, we went from essentially no fire in a compartment to rollover and flashover within 30 seconds. So, that's a lot of batteries going. That could be like a full battery pack from a residential energy storage, kind of all built up in one room. But just kind of be aware that some of those dynamics can change and they can happen pretty quickly.
So with your course, if you can give the elevator speech on your course, what we want to direct people there. We're going to offer the link to the course in the show notes and everything. So what are they going to get out of the course, and why should we point them that way as firefighters?
Well, the objective with that is just to give everyone basically the same baseline. So we're all talking about the same thing. So we start off with, how are cells constructed? What are they made out of? Because you're going to need to know, it's made of all these components. It's plastics, it's electrolyte, which is hydrocarbons, chemicals sort of similar to gasoline. And then what makes those go into, so what is thermal runaway? And then what can make them go into thermal runaway? Because we all know if you stab one with a nail or throw it in a fire, it can go into thermal runaway. But there are some other causes to know of. So you're aware of potentially what can make them go. And then we start talking about what it means when you have thermal runaway propagation. So what that is, how it moves through a battery pack, and how that can change the scale of your hazard. So how that can go from essentially, if your cell phone, catches on fire on your desk, that's just a small fire in your desk. But if it can release enough gas to create an explosion hazard in a confined space, that's another hazard altogether. So it's going to equip you with these tools to know what's driving the hazard. And then a good portion of the class is how do you get to knowing what hazards are possible? And it's all about considering the size of the battery pack and whatever space it's in. So is it out in the open? Is it inside like a mechanical closet? Is it inside its own enclosure? And we get to how you can get to fire and explosion hazards from those sort of those building blocks early on.
A big thing you said that a lot of people are trying to figure out is how are we putting 20,000, 25,000, 30,000 gallons of water on these fires? And they're putting water on that flammable gas, right? That seems like what they're really putting water on, because they're not getting to the seat of the fire, which is the problem. So, I think that when you said that, the light bulb's like, it's not that they're not, they're not going out. They're difficult to put out, but the problem is we're not getting water where we really need to get the water. And that's going to continue to be a problem because of, that whole path you went down. So, some light bulbs, came on for me when we were going through this, protecting them to keep stuff from happening. And that's also making it hard for us to put the fire out though. So,
there's a couple examples that I could give you, one of the first energy storage systems that we ever tested in the lab, there's generally not too many surprises in the fire lab at UL. We might see a big fire, but usually we're expecting it. And, very early in energy storage system fires, there was an incident where we had a fire start, and, we're saying, okay, great, this is part of the test. And then it started getting bigger than we can really have in that lab. I mean, every lab's got its limits. The lab started heating up. We started backing up our exhaust system. So we decided to terminate the test. And, much to our surprise, we really had some difficulty terminating that test. So that customer was pretty apprehensive with me when I said, I want to deploy 2 hand lines pre-charged before the test. They said, you're not going to need that. I said, yeah, but just in case, I don't want to have to pull them out while this thing's on fire. And so we ended up grabbing both 1.5-inch hand lines, and the technician I was working with and I, absolutely no purchase on the fire whatsoever. We were basically cooling the gas, as you put it, that was coming out. And that was beneficial to do in that instance because we weren't, setting a test wall on fire, and we were kind of slowing the rate it moved through the equipment down. But the stuff that was on the parts that were on fire, we were not extinguishing them. And we got a little bit better. Like there was a couple plugs that had sort of blown out during the fire, and that allowed us to sort of to go to just basically a straight stream and try to bank it into those plug holes. That got a little better, but it didn't do the full job. And so your 25 and 30,000 gallons of water, exactly right. It's coming from not being able to get the water where it needs to go. And I think you've seen they tend to have maybe a different approach in Europe. They've been a little bit more accepting of just dunking the EVs in tanks. I'm not saying that that's the way, but you've seen it successful. I mean, there was a BMW incident where they just said, you know what, throw it in a dumpster, fill it halfway full of water. You only have to have it come up above the battery pack. And I know that there's a couple manufacturers that don't like that approach, but resource-wise, if you can get it there, that gets the battery at least up underwater. No hose stream's going to beat that,
We have some technology now where we are putting essentially a blanket over a car for car fires. Does that methodology work at all when we're dealing with stored energy on a battery pack in a vehicle?
Not really. I mean, if you look at the physics and the heat transfer of why, you're essentially going to be smothering the cabin fire and really not taking any heat away from that battery pack. So I was actually just at the FDSOA last week, and we had some discussion of that there. It's not to say there's going to be no benefit. So there's, if there's jets of fire coming out from the battery and you get this blanket over that, and that stops those jets, that may be part of exposure control. And then you're eliminating this idea of throwing tons and tons of water at it. But that's not going to do anything to mitigate what's going on with the battery.
Well, is there anything else you'd like everyone to know that we didn't cover today?
Sure. I mean, just stay tuned. I think there's a lot of people working very hard on all the different types of batteries now. I mean, we didn't even get into it, but that early on in the show, you mentioned having a way to control personal electronic device fires. And so there's some folks at UL who created a standard for these bags that you can carry on planes to throw them in. Now, the challenge is who's going to put the glove on, go grab it, and get it in the bag. But there's people working on that problem at FSRI. We're sort of continuing what we've done with stationary energy storage. And then this year, we're looking a lot harder at e-mobility and electric vehicles. But, really, there's this technology is developed so fast that we're all sort of chasing the answers now, and we're going to be getting it out as quickly as we can. But stay tuned to FSRI, NFPA, and the other fire research organizations for answers.
All right, Adam, thank you so much for being here with us today on B-Shifter.
Thanks very much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
That wraps up this B-Shifter. Thank you so much for listening, and thanks to Adam Barowy from UL's Fire Safety Research Institute and all his knowledge on lithium-ion batteries. If you care to learn more, that information is in the show notes, as well as our contact information, links to all of the latest workshops, and the Hazard Zone Conference coming up here in 2023. If you liked what you heard today, please tell a friend and subscribe. Until next time, thanks so much for listening to B Shifter.